a Bigfoot tribe kidnapped my wife. That's what the rancher swears happened on a storm-torn night in the Idaho foothills. For weeks, he and his wife had heard the knocks, smelled the foul odor, and found tracks too large for any known animal. The cattle wouldn't go near the tree line. The dogs refused to guard the barn. And then, during a lightning storm, the back door crashed open. By the time he reached the kitchen, his wife was gone. The sheriff blamed a drifter, but the search. Dogs followed her scent into the forest and lost it near a creek, where woven structures of branches were found. Some say grief drove the rancher mad. Others whisper he stumbled onto proof of something we've all been told doesn't exist. If the knocks were warnings, what else did he ignore before his wife vanished? And the bigger question, was she taken by a hidden tribe? Or did something far darker claim her? You being here means more than you know. If your heart still makes room for wonder and gentleness, then you're already one of us. I've been a rancher all my life, working the same stretch of land my father worked before me, up in the Clearwater Mountains of northern Idaho. Years on this earth, and 30 of them spent tending cattle through every kind of weather these hills can throw at a man. I'm not given 2 flights of fancy or tall tales. Never had much patience for the UFO crowd or those ghost hunter types that sometimes drift through our town, stirring up nonsense. What I'm about to tell happened 6 years ago, though some nights it feels like yesterday. I've kept quiet about it until now, partly because I doubt anyone would believe me, but mostly because I'm not sure I've forgiven myself for what came after. A man carries certain responsibilities to his family, to his land, to the truth. Sometimes those duties pull in different directions. My wife Mara used to tell me I was too practical for my own good. Caleb Harker, she'd say, there are things in this world that don't fit in your neat little boxes. I'd usually just grunt and go back to whatever needed fixing. That was my way. If something didn't make sense, I'd focus on what did. Mending fences, rotating pastures, keeping the books balanced. The ranch sits on 800 acres, backing up against national forest land. It's rough country, all steep draws and timber, with patches of meadow where we run our cattle during the summer months. We're the last property before the wilderness takes over. Our nearest neighbor is 12 miles down the valley, and cell service is spotty at best. That isolation never bothered me before. If anything, I took pride in it. I'm writing this down now because people ought to know what's out there, even if they don't believe it. More importantly, they need to understand what happens when a man like me, someone who's built his life on what he can see and touch and measure, comes face to face with something that shouldn't exist, something that turns all those neat little boxes upside down. The papers called it a mountain lion attack. The sheriff's report mentions unusual tracks, but chalks them up to bears. Even Mara, well, she has her own theory about what happened that autumn. But I know what I saw, what I heard, what I smelled on those cold mornings when the mist hung low in the draws, and something watched from the tree line. Something that knew exactly what it was doing. I've spent 6 years trying to make sense of it all, running it through my mind like working a smooth stone between my fingers. Some nights I'll wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I hear those same sounds coming from the ridge behind our house. Mara says I've changed since then, grown quieter, more watchful. She's probably right, but you need the whole story to understand. It started in late September, when we were bringing the herd down from the high meadows. Mara and I met 20 years ago at the county fair. She was selling honey from her family's apiary, and I was there showing cattle. She had this way about her, still does, like she could see right through you. Not in a harsh way, but like she was reading something written on your soul. We married that next spring, and she took to ranch life like she was born to it. She's always been more attuned to the subtle shifts in our world than I am. Where I see a broken fence that needs mending, she notices how the wildflowers have changed their blooming patterns. When I'm focused on cattle weight and feed costs, she's watching the way birds move through our valley. It's a different kind of wisdom, one I probably should have paid more attention to. Our routine was simple enough. Up before dawn, coffee on, the porch watching the sun paint the ridge lines. I'd head out to check the herds, while Mara tended her garden and kept the books. The rhythm of ranch life suited us both, predictable in its unpredictability, if that makes any sense. Weather, predators, market prices, there's always something trying to upset your plans. But you learn to roll with it. The changes started so gradually, I almost missed them. First, it was the cattle. They've always been skittish around the forest edge. Any rancher will tell you that's normal. But this was different. The herd would bunch up tight, even in our best grazing meadows, and they'd keep their backs to the tree line. You'd see them lift their heads, nostrils flaring, staring at nothing we could see. "There's something in those trees, Caleb," Mara said. One evening, as we watched the sunset from our porch, I keep seeing movements, like shadows, but they don't match up with the branches. I remember exactly what I said. Probably just mountain lions marking their territory, or bears coming down, early for the berry patches. She shook her head, that knowing look in her eyes. "This is different. Whatever it is, it's watching us. Really watching us, Caleb. Like it's thinking." I should have listened closer, but I did what I always did. Focused on the practical, checked our fences for breaks, looked for tracks, made sure our livestock guardian dogs were properly stationed. The dogs were agitated too, but they weren't barking at anything specific. They'd pace the fence lines at night, hackles raised, but never gave their warning bark. Mara started carrying her grandfather's old hunting knife when she went to tend her garden, though she never said why. I caught her studying the tree line, through binoculars more than once, especially near the old cottonwood grove where the property meets the national forest. She'd make notes in a little journal, but whenever I asked about it, she'd just say she was tracking wildlife patterns. Looking back, I realized we were both trying to maintain normalcy in our own ways. Me by ignoring the signs, her by trying to understand them. But there's no denying that something had changed in our valley. The familiar had become strange, and the comfortable rhythms of ranch life were slowly being replaced by something else. Something watchful. The first real signs that something was wrong came in early October. I found 3 fence posts snapped, clean through about 4 feet up from the ground. Not weather damage, these were solid cedar posts I'd put in myself just last spring. The breaks were rough, splintered, like something had grabbed and twisted them. No normal predator could do that, and vandals would have cut them clean with tools. Our dogs, good working animals that had never given us trouble, started acting strange around the barn. Zeus and Athena, our 2 Anatolian shepherds, would plant their feet 20 yards from the barn doors and refuse to go closer. These were dogs that had faced down bears and mountain lions without hesitation, but something about that barn made them whine and tuck their tails. I checked the barn thoroughly, of course. Didn't find anything out of place, just that lingering feeling that something wasn't right. The hay was stacked exactly as I'd left it, tools all hanging where they should be. But the air felt different inside, heavier somehow. Mara said it felt like walking into a room right after someone's left it. That sense of recent presence. Then came the knocking. I first heard it on a Tuesday evening in late October, just as the sun was dropping behind the western ridge. 3 sharp raps, evenly spaced, echoing up from the valley. Then silence for exactly 1 minute before another series. Knock, knock, knock. It went on for almost an hour. I told myself it was someone doing late work on their property, though we both knew our nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. The next night it came again, same time, same pattern. Only this time it moved, starting in the valley and working its way up toward our northern pasture. Mara sat with me on the porch, her hand tight around mine as we listened to it draw closer. The cattle bunched up tight in the field, all facing the same direction. That was the first night I caught the smell. Even now, years later, I can't quite describe it right. Like rotting vegetation, but deeper, more primitive. A moss-covered cave that's never seen sunlight, mixed with something else, something animal but not quite right. It hung in the air like fog, too heavy to drift away even when the wind picked up. I'm not proud to admit how long I clung to rational explanations, told myself it was just bears, getting bold before hibernation, or maybe some kids playing pranks. But standing there in the dark, listening to those methodical knocks drawing closer while the alien smell wrapped around us, I felt something shift in my understanding of our valley, of what might be out there watching. I kept my doubts to myself, though. Ranchers can't afford to spook easily. There's always work that needs doing, animals that need tending. But I started carrying my rifle when I made my evening rounds, and I never quite managed to shake the feeling that something was sizing us up, testing our boundaries. The morning after those first knocks, Mara was different. She'd always been the steady one between us, but now she moved through her daily routines like someone watching a play they'd rather not be in. I'd catch her stopping mid-task, staring out windows, particularly toward the northern ridge where the pines grew thick. "There's something up there," she told me over coffee one morning, her voice tight. "It's been watching the house." I tried to reassure her. Probably just elk moving through. They're coming down earlier this year with the cold. She shook her head, fingers wrapped tight around her mug. "This wasn't an elk, Caleb. I saw it yesterday evening, just before sunset, standing upright on 2 legs, right at the tree line. Tall, taller than any man I've ever seen. The way it moved," she paused, searching for words. "It was smooth, deliberate, like it knew exactly where it was going. No animal moves like that." I wanted to dismiss it, but the certainty in her voice gave me pause. Mara wasn't given 2 flights of fancy. In 23 years of marriage, I'd never known her to exaggerate or imagine threats that weren't there. 2 days later, I found the tracks. I was checking the south pasture after heavy rain, making sure none of the cattle had gotten bogged down in the mud. The ground was soft, taking clear impressions of every hoof and boot print. That's when I saw them, a line of footprints, pressed deep into the earth, each one nearly twice the length of my size 12 boots. They weren't bare tracks. I've seen plenty of those, and these were different. They showed 5 distinct toes, a pronounced arch, and a heel that pressed deeper than the front, like something heavy walking upright. What struck me most was how they formed a straight line, 1 foot directly in front of the other, like something that knew exactly where it was going. No stumbling, no side-to-side movement, like you'd see with a bear or any other 4-legged animal trying to walk upright. I stood there for a long time studying those prints. Part of me wanted to call Mara to show her what I'd found. Maybe it would help explain what she'd seen on the ridge. But another part, the part that was starting to understand just how vulnerable we were out here, made me keep quiet instead. I took my pocket knife and measured the length against the blade, 16 inches, heel to toe. I didn't tell anyone about the tracks, not even Mara, but I noted the date in my ledger, along with the measurements and a rough sketch. Some things you need to keep record of, even if you're not ready to face what they might mean. The days grew shorter as autumn crept in, and I threw myself into ranch work with a desperate kind of energy. There were always fences to mend, cattle to move, equipment to maintain, anything to keep my mind off those tracks I'd found in the mud. But while physical labor could tire my body, it did nothing to quiet the growing unease that had settled over our home like a heavy blanket. Mara spent more time indoors than usual, but her attention was always drawn to the windows. She'd taken to keeping a notebook, jotting down times and dates of things she noticed. When I'd come in from working, she'd be at the kitchen table, making her careful notes. "We need to understand what's happening," she said one evening, pushing her notebook toward me. "Look at the pattern here. The dogs always start acting strange around the same time, just before dusk. And those knocking sounds, they're not random, Caleb. They come in sets of 3, always from different directions, like they're—" She hesitated, "like they're communicating." I didn't want to look at her notes, didn't want to acknowledge that she might be right. "Mara, please. We've got enough real things to worry about without creating more real things." Her voice had an edge I rarely heard. "Like those tracks you found in the south pasture, the ones you think I don't know about." That stopped me cold. I'd been so careful not to mention them. "I saw you measuring them," she continued. "Saw you writing in your ledger. Why won't you talk to me about this?" Before I could answer, the dogs started whining from their kennels. Not their usual alert barking, but a low, keening sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. We both fell silent, listening. That's when I heard it. Soft murmurs coming from just outside the house. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the wind in the eaves. But the sound had structure to it, rhythm. It reminded me of people talking quietly in the next room. Except the cadence was wrong somehow. Too measured, too deliberate. The murmurs moved from the north side of the house to the east, maintaining that same careful pattern. Not wind, not any animal I knew. The dogs had gone completely silent. Mara gripped my arm, her fingers digging. Do you hear it?" she whispered. "They're talking to each other." I reached for the rifle I kept by the door, but Mara shook her head. "Don't," she said. "Just listen." We stood there in our dark kitchen, barely breathing, as those soft, patterned sounds circled our home. When they finally faded, the silence felt heavier than before, more absolute, like the whole valley was holding its breath. I checked every door and window twice that night, but I knew locks wouldn't matter. Whatever was out there, it was testing us, learning our routines, and somewhere deep down, I knew we were failing some kind of test we didn't understand. The storm came without warning. One moment the evening was still, heavy with that unnatural silence, and the next, thunder cracked overhead like artillery fire. I'd seen plenty of mountain storms in my years on the ranch, but this one felt different, wrong. The wind howled through the valley with a voice that made my skin crawl. Lightning split the sky, so close it left purple after images dancing in my vision, the flash illuminated the cottonwoods at the edge of our property, their branches thrashing like desperate arms. Another strike hit a tree not 100 yards from the house. I heard the wood explode, felt the concussion in my chest. The dogs started howling then, a sound I'd never heard them make before. Not their usual warning barks, or even the fearful whining from earlier. This was pure terror, high and keening, cutting through even the thunder. I was checking the windows, making sure they were latched, when I heard it, a soft scraping at the back door, not the wind, not debris, something deliberate. "Mara," I called out, reaching for my rifle. "Get away from the windows." The scraping became more insistent. Metal groaned as something tested the hinges. I could hear the doorframe creaking under pressure. "Mara," I turned, scanning the darkness of our home. The power had gone out with the first lightning strike, leaving only the occasional flash to illuminate the rooms. "Mara, answer me." The back door shuddered in its frame. Once, twice. On the third impact, the wood splintered and gave way with a sound like a gunshot. Cold wind and rain whipped into the house, carrying that sickly sweet rotting moss smell I'd come to dread. I raised my rifle toward the doorway, but the lightning flashes showed only darkness beyond. "Mara," I shouted, my voice nearly lost in the storm, "where are you?" Room by room, I searched our home, calling her name. The bathroom window was open, curtains billowing in the wind. She wouldn't have gone out there, not in this storm, not with that thing. I grabbed my raincoat and flashlight, charging out into the deluge. The beam cut through sheets of rain, catching nothing but wind-whipped grass and the twisted shadows of trees. Lightning revealed the yard in strobing snapshots, each flash showing it empty, yet somehow different, like the landscape was rearranging itself between moments of darkness. "Mara." My voice was swallowed by thunder. The dogs had gone silent. I searched the barn, the tool shed, the root cellar. Nothing. No tracks in the mud, no sign of struggle. Just the rain hammering down and that rotten sweet smell growing stronger with each lightning flash. She was gone. My wife was gone, and I was alone in a storm that felt more like a living thing with each passing moment. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving behind a sky the color of old bruises. I waited until 6 a.m. sharp before calling the sheriff's office, though I hadn't slept a minute. My hands shook as I dialed, and I had to start over twice. Sheriff Donnelly arrived within the hour, his county truck followed by 2 deputy vehicles throwing up rooster tails of mud from our access road. I watched them through the kitchen window, still standing exactly where I'd been since first light, my coffee gone cold and untouched. "Mr. Harker," Donnelly nodded as he stepped onto the porch, his weathered face giving nothing away. He was a tall man, lean as a fence post, with grey threading through his mustache. "Walk me through what happened." The search teams arrived by mid-morning, their orange vests bright against the muddy ground. I watched them organize into groups, marking sections on their maps, while Sheriff Donnelly coordinated from his truck radio. 2 handlers brought tracking dogs, German shepherds that pulled eagerly at their leads as they were given one of Mara's shirts, 2 cent. The dogs picked up her trail immediately, heading straight for the tree line where the back door faced. I followed behind the handlers, my throat tight as I watched the shepherds work. They moved with purpose through the first quarter mile, weaving between the pines and following whatever invisible thread connected them to my wife. "They've got something strong," one of the handlers called back. The dogs led us to Sawmill Creek, where the water ran high and brown from the storm. Here, The shepherds grew agitated, circling the bank and whining. They'd cross a few yards, return, cross again, but the certainty was gone from their movements. Water breaks the scent, the handler explained, though I could tell something was bothering him. But they should pick it up on the other side if she crossed here. They didn't. The dogs ranged up and down both banks for 20 minutes before. Sitting down, their earlier enthusiasm completely drained. I'd seen enough tracking work with stray cattle to know what it meant. The trail simply ended here, as if Mara had vanished into thin air. By early afternoon, the volunteer teams started reporting in. A group of local hunters who'd joined the search called Donley over to something they'd found about half a mile upstream. I followed, hope and dread warring in my chest. What they'd discovered made my blood run cold. Woven between 3 young pines was a crude structure of branches and saplings, bent and twisted together in ways that seemed deliberate but wrong. It was too low for a hunter's blind, too complex for wind damage. Similar constructions stood nearby, creating a sort of pathway through the trees. Could be teenagers, one of the deputies suggested. We get them building forts out here sometimes. I stared at the twisted branches. They were thick, some nearly as wide as my arm, and bent at impossible angles without breaking. No teenager did this. Then I spotted the bones. They were partially buried in the forest duff, near the largest structure, elk and deer remains. Mostly, some looked old, green with moss, while others were fresher. A deputy kicked at them dismissively. Probably a mountain lion's kill site, he said. They'll cache their kills and come back to them. But I'd seen plenty of lion kills. These bones were different, stacked deliberately, the larger ones arranged in neat piles. Some showed signs of being cracked open, not by teeth, but by something that wanted the marrow inside. Sheriff Donley was watching me closely. Something you want to add, Mr. Harker? I shook my head slowly, knowing anything I said would only make them doubt me more. They needed something concrete, something they couldn't explain away. But standing there, among those twisted branches and stacked bones, I realized just how alone I truly was. The days blurred together after that first search. Teams kept coming out, smaller groups now, meticulously covering ground we'd already searched. Each evening, they'd return with nothing new. No tracks, no sign of struggle, no torn clothing. Just silence from the trees and that lingering sense of being watched. 2 weeks in, Sheriff Donley called me into his office in town. He had a manila folder open on his desk, and I could see Mara's driver's license photo paper clipped to the top. "We need to discuss other possibilities, Mr. Harker," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Sometimes, when a person goes missing like this, well, they've made a choice. She didn't leave me." The words came out harder than I intended. Donley sighed, flipping through papers. "Your nearest neighbor mentioned some arguments. Said Mara seemed restless lately. Talked about wanting changes. Everyone argues." I gripped the arms of the chair. "You didn't see what I saw out there. The tracks, the structures, which could all be explained by natural causes." He closed the folder. "Look, we're not giving up, but we have to be realistic about where to put our resources." I knew what that meant. The search was winding down by the 3rd week. Only a couple of deputies would stop by, more out of courtesy than conviction. The local papers stopped running stories. People in town started giving me those looks, pity mixed with something else, like they were trying to decide if I was a grieving husband or something worse. I couldn't sleep anymore. Every night, I'd sit on the porch with my rifle across my lap, watching the tree line. The cattle still wouldn't graze near the forest edge. The dog stayed close to the house, growling at shadows. Sometimes, in those dark hours before dawn, I'd hear it, that soft, rhythmic knocking from the valley. 3 beats, pause, 2 beats, too regular to be random, too deliberate to be branches. In the wind, once, I caught a glimpse of movement along the ridge, something tall and dark, moving with an odd rolling gait before disappearing into the pines. I started keeping a log. Times, locations, sounds. The strange sour smell would come and go, stronger after rain. I found more tracks, but never where anyone else could see them. They'd always be gone by morning, like the ground itself was hiding evidence. Sheriff Donnelly stopped by one last time, a month after Mara disappeared. He had papers for me to sign, something about the case moving to inactive status. His eyes swept over my notebook, the thermos of coffee, the loaded rifle. "Don't do this to yourself, Caleb," he said quietly. "Don't let it consume you." But he didn't understand. Something had taken Mara, something that didn't want to be found, that knew these woods better than any search team. And it was still out there, watching, waiting. I couldn't leave. Not while there was a chance she was still alive. Not while those knocks kept coming from the darkness, like signals I couldn't quite understand. The signs started small at first. 3 weeks after the search officially ended, I found a neat pyramid of riverstones stacked against the corral gate. Not scattered or tumbled, deliberately placed. The kind of thing that speaks of purpose, of hands that can grip and arrange. I photographed it, but by the time I returned with a measuring tape, the stack had been scattered. The tracks came next, fresh ones, different from what I'd seen before. Near the cottonwoods, where Mara first claimed to see shadows, I found a line of impressions in the morning dew. These weren't the massive prints from before. They were smaller, maybe 14 inches long, but with the same distinctive shape, like oversized human feet, but wider at the toes, deeper at the heel. I tried casting them in plaster, but my hands were shaking so badly I botched it. That sour smell returned too, stronger than ever. It would drift across the pasture in the early morning hours. That unmistakable mix of rotting vegetation and something else, something musky and alive. The cattle would bunch together, pressing against the far fence whenever that odor rolled. Even the most stubborn steers wouldn't graze within 100 yards of where it lingered. I started keeping watch from the hayloft around dusk, using my old spotting scope. That's when I saw them. At first I thought my mind was finally cracking, grief and isolation playing tricks on my eyes, but no amount of blinking or rubbing my eyes could erase what I witnessed on the ridge. 2 figures, moving in that fluid, rolling gait I'd seen before, one significantly larger than the other, both covered in what looked like dark fur that caught the last rays of sunlight. They moved together, stopping occasionally to scan the valley. Even at that distance, I could tell they were watching the ranch. Watching me, I fumbled for my phone, trying to record them, but the fading light and distance made the video useless. Just dark shapes against a darker tree line. By the time I climbed down and got my rifle, they were gone. Some mornings I'd wake to find branches arranged in odd patterns near the house, not broken or scattered by wind, but woven together in ways that spoke of deliberate design. Other times, I'd discover tufts of dark hair snagged on the barbed wire to course. For elk or bear, the rational part of my mind tried to explain it away. Grief can do strange things to a person. Isolation plays tricks. Maybe I was seeing patterns where there were none, finding meaning in coincidence because I needed something to make sense of Mara's disappearance. But then I'd find another stack of stones, or catch that distinctive odor on the wind, or hear those rhythmic knocks echoing across the valley, and I'd know whatever was out there, it was real, and it was getting bolder. I couldn't take the waiting anymore. One crisp October morning, I saddled my most reliable horse, Buck, and packed enough supplies for a full day's ride. The sun had barely crested the eastern ridge when we set out, following the same path where Mara had pointed that evening months ago, insisting she'd seen something moving with purpose through the trees. Buck's ears kept swiveling, tracking sounds. I couldn't hear. He was usually steady as a rock, but today his muscles tensed beneath me, ready to bolt at the slightest provocation. I kept one hand on the reins and the other near my rifle, though I wasn't sure what good either would do if we found what I was looking for. The terrain grew steeper as we climbed, forcing us to zigzag between weathered granite outcrops. Around mid-morning, we reached a natural saddle between two peaks where the forest thinned enough to give a clear view of the valley below. My ranch looked small from up here, vulnerable. I could see why anything living in these hills would choose this spot to watch the land below. That's when I noticed the first structure. At first, I thought it was just storm damage, a pile of logs and branches heaped against a standing dead pine. But as I dismounted to investigate, the deliberate nature of its construction became clear. Thick logs had been stacked and wedged together, creating a crude but effective blind. Smaller branches were woven between them, providing cover while maintaining visibility. This wasn't the work of wind or weather. This was built. Buck wouldn't go near it. He danced backward, nostrils flaring, when I tried to lead him closer. I tied him to a young aspen and continued on foot. I found 2 more blinds within 100 yards, each positioned to overlook different approaches to the valley. They were old, moss grew on the lower logs, and spiderwebs stretched between branches, but they hadn't been here when I'd last ridden this ridge in the spring. Someone, or something, had built them during the summer months. The silence hit me then, not the peaceful quiet of a mountain morning, but a heavy, watching kind of silence. No birds called, no squirrels chattered. Even the wind seemed to die away, leaving me in a pocket of dead air that made the hair on my neck stand up. Then came the knocks, 3 sharp impacts, evenly spaced, echoing from somewhere to the north. A pause of maybe 30 seconds, then 3 more from the west. They were too regular to be woodpeckers, too solid to be branches falling. They reminded me of the sounds we'd heard from the valley, but closer now, clearer. I stood there, my breath shallow in my chest, as the knocks continued. Their conversation across the ridge. Buck stamped nervously behind me, his reins jingling against the aspen trunk. I wanted to document this, to prove I wasn't imagining things. But my hands shook too badly to operate my phone's camera. The structures loomed around me, silent sentinels, that had watched my valley, watched my home, maybe watched Mara for months without my knowing, and now they were watching me. I was still processing what I'd found on the ridge when Sheriff Donnelly's cruiser pulled up to my gate 3 days later. The autumn wind whipped his coat as he stepped out, manila folder tucked under his arm. His face told me everything before he said a word. "Mind if we talk inside, Caleb?" he asked, already moving toward the house. I wordlessly led him to the kitchen, where the morning coffee had gone cold in its pot. Neither of us sat. Donnelly cleared his throat, setting the folder on the table. "I'll be straight with you. We're suspending active investigation into Mara's disappearance." He held up a hand as I started to protest. Unless new evidence comes to light, there's nothing more we can officially do. We've exhausted our resources, interviewed everyone within 50 miles, and followed every lead we have. What about the structures I found? I demanded, my voice hoarse. The tracks. The Caleb, he cut in, his tone shifting from official to almost paternal. I need you to listen carefully. Words getting round about what you've been saying, about giant footprints, about those branch shelters that any hunter or hiker could have thrown together, about sounds in the night that could have been anything from wind to wildlife. I felt heat rising in my neck. You think I'm making this up? I think you're grieving, he said quietly. And I think grief can make us see patterns where there aren't any. Make us reach for explanations that seem to make sense of senseless things. I know what I've seen, Sheriff. He sighed, rubbing his weathered face. Look, start talking about Bigfoot or some lost tribe living in these hills, and people will stop taking you seriously. They'll write you off as another mountain crazy, and if something real does turn up about Mara's case, nobody will listen. The truth of his words stung worse than any accusation. I stared out the window at the ridgeline where I'd found those watching posts, where the knocks had echoed across the valleys. The case remains open, Donnelly continued, softer now, but active searching stops. I'll keep your number handy, and if anything new comes up. He trailed off, both of us knowing how unlikely that was. He left the folder on the table, copies of reports, statements, search grids marked in red ink, a paper trail that led nowhere. I heard his cruiser start up, gravel crunching under the tires as he drove away. Standing alone in my kitchen, I could feel the weight of the hills pressing in through the windows. The same hills that had swallowed Mara without a trace, that harbored whatever had built those structures, that echoed with those deliberate knocks. Sheriff Donnelly was right about one thing. I did see patterns, but he was wrong about why. I gathered up the folder and set it aside, knowing I'd probably never open it. The official investigation was over, but my land still held secrets, and something out there still watched. After Donnelly left, something shifted in me. The suspension of the investigation didn't mean an end. It meant I could focus on gathering evidence my own way, without worrying about what the authorities would think. I started small at first. Every evening, I'd leave out fresh fruit and dried meat at the edge of the property, marking the spots with GPS coordinates in a notebook. Most mornings, the offerings would be gone, though I couldn't rule out regular wildlife. But sometimes, the way things disappeared felt deliberate. Apples taken, but cores left in neat piles. Meat stripped clean from bones, arranged in straight lines. I bought a professional audio recorder, the kind researchers use for capturing bird calls. Every night, I'd set it up in different locations around the property, focusing on areas where I'd heard those rhythmic knocks before. Hours of wind and normal forest sounds filled my hard drive, but occasionally something else emerged. Low, throaty vocalizations that didn't match any known animal, patterns of wood knocks that seemed to answer each other across the valley. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 slow ones. The type of sounds that made the hair on my neck stand up when I listened through headphones in the dark. The trail cameras were my biggest investment. I mounted 12 of them strategically around the property, especially near the spots where I'd found tracks or broken branches. Most days brought nothing but deer, elk, and the occasional bear. But one morning in late October, reviewing the night's captures, my hands started shaking. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m. The image was dark, grainy, caught at the edge of the infrared sensor's range. Between two large pines, something moved. Standing upright, it had to be at least 8 feet tall. The figure was blurred, as if caught mid-stride, but the proportions were all wrong for a bear. The arms hung too long. The head sat directly on broad shoulders, with no visible neck. When I zoomed in, trying to clean up the image, it only became more unsettling. The texture of what might have been hair, the suggestion of massive muscles under it. I printed the photo, studied it for hours, under different lights, trying to find some explanation that made sense. A shadow trick, a deer standing weird, anything. But I kept coming back to what I knew in my gut. I was looking at something that shouldn't exist. Something that had been watching us long before Mara disappeared. The next day, I found that camera smashed at the base of its tree. Not fallen. Not damaged by weather, but deliberately destroyed. The heavy metal case was crushed like it had been squeezed in a giant fist. When I checked the memory card, every image had been corrupted except that one blurry frame. I added it to my growing collection of evidence, recordings of those strange knocks and calls, GPS coordinates of food sites, detailed notes of every unusual sign or sound. The wall of my study became a map of patterns, of movement through my land. Some might call it obsession. I called it finally seeing what had been there all along. The seasons turned, but time felt frozen for me. Winter settled over the valley like a shroud, then melted into a one spring. I worked my ranch in a daze, going through motions I'd performed for decades, while my mind stayed fixed on the ridgelines, on the shadows between trees, on every unexpected sound that broke the familiar rhythms of my land. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't the sharp, sudden awareness of a single observer. It was a constant pressure, like the weight of multiple gazers following my every move. Sometimes I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision, dark shapes, shifting behind branches, too coordinated to be random, too deliberate to be wind or wildlife. When I'd turn to look directly, they'd already be gone, leaving nothing but stirred leaves and that lingering sense of presence. One night in early March, I woke to voices, not the clear speech of people, but something more primal, a weaving of low murmurs and soft, clicking sounds that seemed to carry meaning. They came from just outside my bedroom window. Multiple sources trading these strange utterances back and forth. The pattern was too regular for random animal noise, too complex for wind through the trees. It reminded me of how Mara used to describe what she heard, like people talking underwater. She'd said, or through a thick wall. I lay there, rigid, in my bed, barely breathing, straining to make sense of the sounds. The voices, if that's what they were, moved around the house in what felt like a predetermined pattern. One would start near the corner, then another would answer from the opposite side. A third would join in from somewhere near the old oak tree. They never raised above that low, rumbling whisper, but the complexity of their exchange was undeniable. In that moment, everything crystallized for me. These weren't isolated incidents or random encounters. I was hearing evidence of a community, a tribe of something that had claimed this territory long before I arrived. The broken fences, the stacked stones, the organized taking of food I'd left out, it all pointed to intelligent, coordinated behavior. And somewhere among them, whether by choice or by force, was Mara. The hardest part wasn't the fear or the uncertainty. It was the maddening sense that answers lay just beyond my reach. Every morning I'd find new signs, branches broken too high for any known animal, strange configurations of stones that couldn't be natural, that distinctive sour moss smell lingering in perfectly still air. But direct evidence stayed elusive, as if they were deliberately maintaining that razor's edge between revealing and concealing themselves. I've spent years trying to make sense of what happened here, turning over every detail, every sound, every shadow I half glimpsed. The sheriff's files may have gone cold, but the land keeps its own record. These ridges hold secrets deeper than any of us imagined, and they speak to those who learn to listen. To anyone thinking of settling in these remote valleys, especially where the old-growth forest crowds close to pasture edges, I have to warn you, pay attention to the signs. When your dogs start refusing to enter certain areas, when you find those perfectly straight lines of massive tracks in the mud, when the knocking starts, that's when you know you're no longer alone on your land. You never really were. Some folks around here whisper about wilderness cults, groups of people who've gone feral in the deep woods. Others point to old stories of hidden tribes that never signed treaties or entered reservations. The wildlife officers stick to their explanations about unusual bear behavior or territorial elk. But none of those theories quite fit what I experienced, what I heard on those countless nights when those patterned murmurs drifted through my walls. The truth about Mara, whether she was taken or went willingly, whether she's still out there or long gone, that's something I may never know. But I've come to understand that ownership of this land is an illusion we tell ourselves. These ridges belong to something older, something that moves between the trees with purpose and intelligence. They observe us, study our patterns, and sometimes, for reasons I still can't fathom, they decide to make their presence known. I've thought about selling the ranch, about trying to start fresh somewhere else. But I stay, partly because I can't abandon the possibility that Mara might return, and partly because I've accepted my role as a witness. Someone needs to remember to warn others that the comfortable boundaries we draw between civilization and wilderness aren't as solid as we pretend. The knocking still comes some nights, echoing across the valley. Those deep, rhythmic sounds that can't be mistaken for anything natural. When you hear them, you know you're being watched, not just by one set of eyes, but many. They're out there, moving through their own invisible territories, following rules we don't understand. So take this as both warning and testimony. If you choose to make your home in these remote places, know that you're entering into an unspoken agreement. These ridges have their own inhabitants, their own hierarchies, their own ways of claiming what they consider theirs. Sometimes they take what they want. Sometimes they leave signs that can't be explained away. And once you become aware of their presence, once you start hearing those knocks in the night, you'll never quite shake the feeling that you're living on borrowed land. The land remembers everything, and so do I. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.